think we're gonna roll. I think we're gonna start this little experiment.
All right.
So welcome to
Let's do it.
another episode of TMI with Mark and Troy. Today it's just Mark and Troy. We don't have any guests in studio except out of camera. You can't see it. Hannah's over there.
Yes.
Say hi, Hannah.
Hi.
Yep, she's here.
She's here.
She didn't want to be on camera this morning, unfortunately. I don't know why, but anyway, so now you just have us. And today we're going to be talking about 5 costly mistakes Iowans retiring often make. Wow, I can't get that out. So mistakes that are often made and how to avoid them.
But first, why you love being an Iowan, Mark?
Oh, gosh, Troy. There's so many reasons why I love being an Iowan. First of all, Iowans are Iowa nice. We got great Midwestern values. Some might call them old-fashioned values, and that's okay. I'll take that as a compliment. Just the folks here are probably the best in the country, and that's one of the reasons why I really enjoy being an Iowan. Growing up on a farm, getting to see how folks really treat each other with respect and dignity. I've flown coast to coast. I've been all over the United States with my travels over the years in business, and folks would say, well, why do you live in Iowa? Isn't that where they have potatoes?
Yeah.
Like, no, sir. But you just stay where you're at. And, keep our little secret to ourselves.
Yeah, Iowa stinks. Just stay where you're at. Tell all your friends. We're not that nice over here.
It's also a great place to live, though, because there's a lot of stuff to do. First of all, it's relatively low cost of living. In preparing for our talk, I knew this. I'd seen many articles on this, but in preparing for this today, I went and did a little Google research, and according to Motley Fool, their article, Best Worst States to Retire in 2025, Iowa ranks in the top 10 states to retire. With an overall ranking score in their survey of ranking of 8 out of the 50. But from what I can recollect, in the past, I've seen this over and over again. Iowa tends to rank towards the top in terms of states to retire. A lot of that has to do with the low cost of living. Yeah, it's not because of the weather.
3 seasons are great.
There's this sliver in the spring and a sliver in the fall. It's beautiful. And also there's a favorable tax system, in my opinion, in the state of Iowa. There's no state tax on Social Security benefits. That's true in other states as well. But retirement accounts, retirement account distributions, IRAs, 401ks, et cetera, if you're 55 years of age or older, are not taxed at the state level, nor are pension income distributions taxed at the state level. So there's a good incentive there for, and that's relatively recent within the last few years. So it's a pretty big incentive to stay right here. And you can always go visit those other warmer climates in the wintertime, but it's a great place to live.
Yeah, I thought that too. When I was younger, I thought, what's so great about Iowa? Maybe it's time to move when I grow up. And now that I'm here, I'm like, I kind of like it here.
It's beautiful too. If you get out in the metro and you explore some of the four corners of our state, there's a lot to see and do right here in our state that I think we all take for granted. And I think that's true of anybody, when they live in their state. I know folks in Colorado who never go to the mountains. Yeah. And if I were there, I would think I would go to the mountains, but maybe I wouldn't. I'd take it for granted. There are a lot of things right here in Iowa to do that I think we take for granted because they're right in our backyard.
Yeah, it's a little different when you work in the state.
Yeah.
Say I go to Florida. Why don't you golf more? Why don't you go to the beach? We work.
Yeah, you're there on vacation.
Right.
Full time.
Why isn't everybody doing this?
Let's talk about the first mistake, Troy. So we identified 5 different costly mistakes that we see Iowans who are planning for retirement. They often make these mistakes. That's good. It can be true for other folks in other states as well, but 5 mistakes. And the first one on our list is underestimating healthcare costs.
Yep, that's a big one. Actually, I just talked to someone the other day that I asked them about healthcare when they're retiring, because they were talking about retiring in January, and her healthcare provider was going to give them benefits until they hit age 65 for Medicare. So they thought they were covered. And so I had that question of what happens when you get on Medicare. I mean, have you inflated those expenses out through retirement? Because a lot of people think we get to Medicare and then we're good. but they don't hit the inflation on top of that, the Medicare expenses, the supplement expenses. And that's a big deal. I think when we look at retirement planning, the healthcare piece is a huge piece that I think people don't estimate enough funds going towards the healthcare down in the future.
Well, and I think a lot of that plays into the fact that we tend to help folks who are, we call them the millionaires next door. They live within their means. Actually, they live below their means. They've saved for retirement. And many of them are W-2 employees.
Right.
We have a few business owners we work with, but a lot of our clients are W-2 employees. They're retiring out of a profession. They worked for an employer. Their income is run through payroll. They have income taxes deducted. They have other deductions like health care that come out. So it's not as if they're writing a check to the healthcare company every single month. It's not something they see and out of sight, out of mind. And then when they retire, all of a sudden, whether it's Medicare or if they retire prior to Medicare age and they have to go on some sort of gap plan to get them to Medicare eligibility, all of a sudden now they have this expense that it was always there, but they didn't see it. When they got their paycheck, it was deposited in their account, direct deposit from their employer. They didn't. It's not like they had to account for it like groceries or their mortgage, or et cetera. Yeah. So I think it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, and all of a sudden it comes back into sight when they make that transition from the working years to the post-working years, which is why it's really critical when we're doing our planning that we not only account for healthcare expenses while they're working, but also if they retire prior to Medicare eligibility age, factoring in those costs for healthcare, gapping until they are Medicare eligible, and then factoring in those costs for Medicare once they are eligible, not just Part B premiums and Part D premiums, prescription drugs. The folks at Bridalwood were here last time talking about all of those expenses, but also we get supplements, things that aren't covered like dental, vision, hearing. All of those expenses can add up, and so we try to estimate a significant budget and then adjust that for inflation, so that we don't end up making that mistake.
Yeah, so that's a big one that they underestimate is healthcare costs. How about the second mistake, ignoring tax surprises?
Oh boy,
surprise!
So this is kind of another one of those I would call it hidden gotchas that folks overlook, and this goes back to the same discussion we had a little bit ago with a lot of those W-2 employees. These are all deducted out prior to that paycheck being deposited into their checking account, so their direct deposit. They've had those taxes already pulled out for state and federal taxes. And once they retire and they start making distributions out of their IRAs, 401ks, and other IOUs to the IRS, surprise, those were all pre-tax dollars that you deferred. It wasn't a tax savings necessarily when you deferred that income. It was a tax deferral. Whether it's a tax savings depends on when you pull it out. Are you paying a lower tax rate than you were when you deferred it? But you deferred those taxes in IRAs, 401ks, and other IOUs, the IRS. Now you're withdrawing those to supplement your retirement income post-retirement transition, and you've got to account for taxes. And every dollar that you pull out has the potential to increase, bumping you potentially into a higher marginal tax rate, increasing your effective tax rate on all of the dollars that are earned or all of your income. You can have a lot of rippling effects with taxes on Social Security, et cetera, things like that. So I think that's a big something that's overlooked and something that we really have to shine a spotlight on when we're helping our clients plan for that transition to retirement, is demonstrating demonstrating the impact of distributions out of different types of accounts and how it impacts their income sources like Social Security, pension, et cetera, and how all of those things work together.
Yeah, I think when you bring that up, Mark, the Social Security, when we look at that, when to claim, that plays a big piece into that as well, because when we look at Social Security, if you turn it on early, you have to use more of your IRA dollars down the road, because now we have less income coming in on a monthly basis, where if we look at a plan and we delay it, maybe use some IRA dollars up front and not as many down the road. So when people ask, when do I turn Social Security on? Just turn it on early. That plays into it as well, the
Absolutely.
tax part.
Sure does. If I turn on Social Security early, not only am I forfeiting a percentage of my full retirement age benefits, those are gone forever, and any cost of living adjustment I would have potentially received on those Social Security benefits, But I'm also now subjecting those Social Security dollars to provisional income calculation. Provisional income calculation is made up of half of your Social Security benefit, plus any distributions from retirement accounts like IRAs and 401ks and other IOUs, the IRS. And the higher your provisional income gets, you hit these thresholds, and all of a sudden, some of your Social Security benefits are subject to tax. Up to 85% of your Social Security benefit could be subject to tax at your effective tax rate. And as a result, by turning that Social Security on, we are getting less. We're getting it for a longer period of time, theoretically. If we live long and we started early, but we're forfeiting a lot of potential benefits. We're forfeiting the cost of living adjustment on those benefits. And we could have actually strategically distributed some of that money out of those IRAs and 401ks, potentially filling up those lower tax brackets with those dollars rather than filling it up with Social Security benefits and still being forced to make distributions out of IRAs. And it can have a really magnified impact on the overall health of a long-term written retirement plan by doing that versus maybe taking a more strategic approach to how to optimize Social Security for the household and coordinate it with your other retirement resources like retirement assets, 401ks, IRAs, et cetera.
So the moral of the story, plan.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to have one simple step that you can do, it would be to plan.
And don't do this in your head.
Yeah.
I know there are folks in the past, financial planners in the past, years ago, before all the fancy tools that we have at our disposal, they would do this on a yellow pad, or maybe some of them were much more brilliant than I am because I'm not that brilliant. They're super smart. They could do this in their head. I cannot do these type of calculations in my head. We have to get the data we need. We have to input it correctly into the financial planning programs that we use. We have to look at it from 6 ways from Sunday and then stress test, because sometimes our thoughts, we say, well, I think this would work. But by the time we stress test it, we realize, that actually had a negative impact somewhere else in the plan. Oh. And so we come up with a list of recommended actions, then we can stress test them in our financial planning program. And only the ones that really make a positive impact, getting us closer to that vision of the future for the client, do we actually then suggest to implement and walk through the steps of implementation. It's very complex. Figuring out what is the optimal strategies for all of these different decisions that have to be made through the retirement process and transitioning to retirement. You can do your best to kind of come up with the assumptions, but then without stress testing them using these type of financial planning tools that we use, I just don't see it. I mean, ignorance is bliss, by the way. A lot of folks, I think, will just go through life and they'll do things on their own and make adjustments, and they'll never know or be any wiser to
the mistakes they've made.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
I would agree.
So next one on the list would be next mistake or third mistake, mishandling of 401k rollovers. Oh boy. Yeah. We've seen this, unfortunately.
We have. I think probably the biggest one would be taking a distribution, obviously. Not knowing the tax consequences, being prior to 59 and a half, there's penalties. That's probably one of the biggest ones. Like, I'm taking a distribution, I'm just going to pay the tax. I don't care. I just want the money.
Yeah. And if you go it alone and you work with these financial institutions, trying to distribute your money, whether you intend to do a rollover to an IRA or transferring from one 401k to another 401k, custodian to custodian transfer, if you're not familiar with how to communicate with the representatives of the financial institutions, you might end up making a distribution rather than a transfer or a rollover from one custodian to another. And now you've taken constructive receipt of those resources, and there's a clock that starts ticking to determine whether that is a taxable event. And you just don't want to put yourself in that position. So it's often a good idea to work with a financial professional who does this on a regular basis, can help you with those transactions so you avoid those mistakes. I'd also say mishandling company stock too. It doesn't happen every day, but oftentimes we're working with folks. We're helping folks make transitions from their working years to post-working years. And it turns out they have company stock that was part of their 401k. And there's something that they can do called net unrealized appreciation. Now, it's not good, right for everybody, Some folks, it may not make sense to do this, but if you have company XYZ stock inside of your 401k, because that's the company you worked for, and the value of that stock when you attained it had a very low initial price, so low cost basis, and now it's appreciated substantially, rather than rolling all of that over as a pre-tax account, you might be able to actually separate that stock and pull it out and have long-term capital gains tax treatment applied to it as opposed to ordinary income tax on the whole thing. There are some nuances to it. We're not going to get into that at this particular time, but just understanding when you see that opportunity to know what it is and then know how to evaluate it. And if you don't, work with somebody who does know how to evaluate it, who does know how to help you with that transaction if it makes sense to take advantage of net unrealized appreciation.
What happens, Mark, if, say I have a 401k and I'm going to another plan and this provider offers a 401k, is it best to take my 401k from my existing plan and transfer it into my new plan? Or is it better to take that 401k and move it out to an outside individual IRA plan where I can maybe have more control over it?
So there's no one size fits all rubber stamp answer to that. But I think you kind of alluded to the fact that you've got to do an evaluation. I'm moving from this plan. Here's a potential of this other plan. Once I move those assets from plan A over to plan B with this new employer, now I am adhering to those plan guidelines, those investment option menu, et cetera, those restrictions. Is it best to take that opportunity then and self-direct it in my own individual retirement arrangement or IRA? And when you separate from service, that's one of those triggering factors allowing you to do that. Once you've rolled that over into the new 401k or the new employer's 401k, you may not be able to do that until you separate from service. So it's one of those things where I think it's important to kind of evaluate that decision before you make it and weigh the options, the new plan, the new options in the plan, the new plan's investment menu, the new plan's restrictions, the new plan's the features of it, what you can and cannot do. So I'm kind of trying to get to, and then decide: am I better off rolling it into the new plan, or am I better off taking control over it myself as an individual retirement arrangement or IRA?
Perfect.
And then make that decision, and then do it in a manner in which when you do a custodian to custodian transfer or rollover so that you don't end up triggering a taxable event.
Right. All right, let's go on to the fourth mistake: overlooking inflation. The inflation silent bite. What happens when we overlook inflation?
Oh boy, our purchasing power goes down as we get older. We have if we have a constant fixed amount of income coming in, but the cost of goods and services keeps going up, then our lifestyle is likely to decrease over time. And so if we're not planning to have an increasing income throughout our lifetime, then most likely our purchasing power will go down and our standard of living may also suffer at that point too. So we feel that it's important when we're doing planning with the folks that we serve that we get, everybody has to do a spending plan.
Yep.
Okay, that spending plan really helps us understand and get a perspective of what it costs to maintain their lifestyle today, the lifestyle they become accustomed to, the lifestyle they're comfortable with. And then we can project that out what we feel is appropriately for the rising cost of goods and services. Some expenses are inflated, some aren't. Some are some expenses we believe are inflated at a higher rate, like healthcare, for example, than maybe other expenses like energy or food, et cetera. I mentioned some expenses aren't inflated at all, and some of them even go away. A big one that we see often, the folks that come to visit with us, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes still have a mortgage. Yep. There may be a good decade or two into paying that down, so they may have a smaller balance, but they're still making mortgage payments. Well, the mortgage P&I, the principal and the interest portion of the payment, that goes away eventually, and it doesn't inflate. And let's say you've got a $2,500 mortgage principal and interest, mortgage payment, and out of that $2,500, $1,800 of it is principal and interest. Well, if we just inflate the entire mortgage payment, at 3%,
Right.
we're going to project out a much higher income that's needed than what is actually needed for that particular expenditure later on. By separating out the P&I in our spending plan, we don't inflate that $1,800, for example, in that case. And eventually it goes away when their mortgage is paid off. But the taxes and the insurance don't go away, and they do inflate. So yeah, we always say, we don't need to know if you're buying a pack of gum at the convenience store, but we like to get a really good idea of what it costs to maintain your lifestyle and break those down into relatively small categories and then apply the appropriate inflation amount or inflation percentage to those expenditures that are inflated, and those that are going to go away or drop off or aren't inflated at all. Then we want to make sure that we adjust for that. So we have a more accurate picture of what your inflation adjusted lifestyle spending would be out into the future.
Right. And adjusting for inflation, we're rarely, I shouldn't even say rarely, I've never seen a client that wants to come in and spend less than what they're living on right now.
Yeah. So
it's like, I want to live on less. I don't want to have as good a lifestyle as I have now.
Nobody's ever said that to us. When they come in to retire, say, when I retire, I want my lifestyle to go down.
Yeah, please.
Now, many of the folks we serve, their income might go down.
Right.
They're high income earners. They're not spending all of that money. But their lifestyle spending generally tends to increase, particularly in those first few years of retirement. Some financial professionals in our industry would refer to those as the go-go years. You've got they call them the go-go years, the slow go years, and then the no-go years. These three segments of your retirement life. And right after you retire, you have more vitality and energy, and you're ready to go traveling and doing all these things. So you might actually have an increase in spending, even be above and beyond what you did during your working years, because you have more free time.
Right.
What's the day of the week that you spend the most money typically?
Yeah, Saturday.
And when you retire, every day is
a Saturday.
So that is a potential as well that we see. But then as you age, your interest in doing traveling, things like that starts to decrease, and eventually get to a point where you're just not capable for doing that. So there's actually something that we call the spending smile. Won't go into detail. That could be another discussion for another day. But we see spending that starts out a little bit higher and then kind of slowly drops over time. And then as folks get older, healthcare expenses can start to take a bigger bite of the budget, and so we see that spending maybe increase towards the tail end of life as well. So, but really planning for that inflation adjusted spending is critical to not putting yourself in a position where your lifestyle is going to decrease over time.
Yeah, I think that goes back to our philosophy, Mark, of purpose and timeline, where every dollar has a purpose, every dollar has a timeline, and this plays in perfectly because every dollar does have a timeline. And when you look at those inflated expenses, and when we use the retirement program, a lot of times I'm looking at this, and you go 20 years out, and at a 3% inflation rate, your expenses are almost doubled.
Yes.
And that's a shocker when you're looking at it. If you have like 10,000 expenses a day, and you look 20 years out, and it's at 20,000. If you don't plan for that and have a dollar preserved for that amount 20 years down the road, you're going to have to do some serious corrections, and you're not going to have a whole lot of time to react.
And that purpose and timeline philosophy helps guide us when we're helping the folks we serve organize their retirement resources. What's at risk? What's not at risk? What's put aside to cover short-term spending, intermediate spending, and then long-term growth to help keep up with or outpace inflation.
Right.
We won't have all of our clients' money allocated to the equities market, stock market. If we go into a major downturn, we don't want them to be forced into a position where they have to either pull back on their lifestyle or sell investments into the negative market.
Right.
That doesn't work out for anybody, except for maybe the person that's buying on the other end. But we want to make sure that in the short term, they have the cash flow that they need and the reserves they need so they can maintain that lifestyle. When I say short term, I'm talking 10 years or less. When I say long term, money that's appropriate maybe for longer term investing, managed equity investing, we're talking 10 years out. And that way, when we go into a major downturn, like we saw earlier this year or during the pandemic, or you pick a financial bubble over the last 3 decades. And you want to be able to weather that storm. It could last years. And so, we want to make sure we have enough money set aside, both in income and assets, to maintain that comfortable lifestyle adjusted for inflation, where they're not forced to sell their equity investments, their stock market investments into that downturn. And that means having somewhere around 10 years worth of resources available that's not subject to that market risk. Fifth mistake. The fifth mistake on our list is failing to plan for what ifs. So, Troy, what kind of what ifs should retirees be thinking about?
What ifs? Unfortunately, we have to look at the loss of a spouse. Healthcare tends to be a big one, especially when it comes to the elderly and getting to that 65, 70 era. You start to see, for me anyway, I started to see my parents' health decline. So then you're starting to look at a long-term care event where you start bringing in outside help, maybe to come in and help with some of the activities for your folks. So I think that's a big expense that people often overlook, or they feel like the state's going to take care of them, or they don't have to worry about it. Maybe Medicare is going to take care of it and cover it, which is just false. That's a whole different ball game when you have a long-term care expense and how you're going to cover that. And if you don't plan, and we talk about planning quite often, you either have to plan to take care of it on your own, or you have to push that care onto something else, maybe insurance carrier. But either way, you have to have a plan. And we stress that quite often with our clients, is having a plan in place. And whatever that plan is, there needs to be a plan.
Yeah, and you mentioned long-term care. Long-term care is not insurance. Long-term care is an event with a high probability of occurrence. Long-term care is a situation you might find yourself in where you need the assistance of someone else to perform activities of daily living. There's 6 activities of daily living, or you have cognitive impairment, like you mentioned, dementia or Alzheimer's or something like that. And you need somebody to care for you. That is an event and a costly one. You can transfer some of that risk using long-term care insurance. You can always do a cost benefits analysis. Is it more appropriate to self-insure and kind of hoard assets for that event, or is it better to pay premiums to an insurance company to transfer some or all of that risk away? That's a personal decision, and one that a financial professional, particularly a retirement planner, should be able to, should be able to help you evaluate that decision. But having a plan isn't having insurance. Having a plan is figuring out who, where, and how. Who is going to care for you? Where will that care be delivered? And how are they going to be compensated for that care that's being delivered? And then, is it going to be a family member? Is it going to be one of your adult children? Is it going to be one of your adult children's spouses? Are you going to be cared for in your home or assisted living, or heaven forbid, a nursing home eventually? How will that be paid for? Is there going to be an outsized inheritance of that adult child that takes care of you, or are you going to pay a professional to come into your home and care for you with in-home care, that kind of stuff? So who, where, and how needs to be addressed. Then you can worry about whether or not it makes sense to transfer some of that risk to an insurance company or self-insure. But this leads to that first one you mentioned, though. We don't all, if we're married, we don't always go at the same time.
Right.
In fact, it's rare. Usually one spouse passes before the other, and it could be that one that was having the long-term care event passes, and the surviving spouse now has found him or herself to be suddenly single, and all of a sudden, a suddenly single tax filer, and that can leave that surviving spouse faced with much higher tax rates, higher taxes on Social Security benefits, increased Medicare premiums through income-related monthly adjustment amounts, or IRMA. There are a lot of things that can happen if we don't plan ahead and thinking, it's not always comfortable to think about this, but what happens to that surviving spouse when the first spouse passes? And are there things we can do today that maybe impact 15, 20, even 30 years from now to help that surviving spouse adjust and pay less in taxes and have a better outcome than leaving them as planning as a married couple for your retirement,
Right.
and then failing to plan for the likely outcome that one of the spouses becomes suddenly single at a late stage in their life.
Yep. Good point. All right, last one. What does retiring with purpose on time mean to you?
Well, if there's a bonus mistake here, we would call this number 6, and that's failing to retire into something that gives you purpose and meaning.
Yep.
A lot of us spend the bulk of our adult lives doing something, trading our time or expertise for income, and it often becomes our identity. If somebody asked you, Troy, what do you do for a living, or who are you? You might say, a retirement income planner or financial planner, as I would say, something like similar to that. Help guide folks to and through that transition to retirement. That becomes our identity. But when maybe somebody else, ran a business, or held a position in state government, or was a teacher, or a firefighter, or whatever it happens to be. And then all of a sudden they transition into retirement, and those associations with the people they worked with, the identity of that career evaporates.
Yep.
We'd like to think that they can maintain those relationships with those coworkers, and some do, but oftentimes, folks will find themselves with less interaction, social interaction, isolation, loss of identity, and that can lead to depression. So we stress when we're going through our discovery visit with prospective new clients, and even with our existing clients, we bring this up often. What are you doing to stay active? What's your purpose? The Japanese call it ikigai. What's your ikigai?
Yep.
What's that thing that gets you up in the morning and gets you active? Because that purpose is what drives your life force to get up and do something, and not just sit around and go to waste. And we really like to encourage folks who are planning that retirement transition to think about what might they do 6 months after they retire.
Yep.
You've rearranged all the furniture. You've cleaned out the garage. You've cleaned out the attic. You've done all the honey-do list, maybe gone on some trips. But now what? Now what are you going to do with the rest of your days? And is there something you can do that gives you meaning and purpose? For some of our retirees or recently retirees, that means a second career doing something.
Yep.
Or taking a consultant position with a company that perhaps they were a professional in one form or fashion, and that translates to consultant work in retirement. Or maybe they decide to go teach others or mentor others, or do some sort of nonprofit work, or whatever that happens to be, but something that keeps them engaged and interacting and having that social aspect.
Yeah, I think it's important. The purpose, I think even in our lifetime right now, the purpose of getting up in the morning, the purpose of going to work, the purpose of making a difference in other people's lives, the purpose of providing for your family, the purpose of staying healthy, the purpose of your appearance. I mean, I think the list goes on. Sometimes I see people and I look at them and I think, what is their purpose? They seem like they're declining, and they're really not caring much about their health anymore, and you can just kind of see the decline. And I often wonder what the purpose is. Like, do you have a purpose in your life that's making you get up in the morning, that you're enjoying life in general, getting up in the morning, enjoying the day? And I think purpose has a big, big part of that.
Well, and humans are goal-seeking organisms anyway. And if you don't have any goals, if you don't have anything that you are working towards, I believe you're likely to decline.
Yeah.
And if you don't use it, you lose it. And the last thing we want to see is our clients, the people we care deeply about, that we've helped get to and through that transition into retirement, to see them waste away because they feel unproductive and unmotivated. Yep. And I don't believe that's the case with most of the folks we serve.
No.
I think they have something that they're retiring into. I like to think that we have something to do with that and encouraging that. But many find purpose and meaning in doing things like volunteer work or caring for their grandkids. that's a big one we see a lot.
Grandkids are huge. Yep. Serving on different boards, volunteer. It's a big thing just to stay involved and engaged in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that is our talk for today. Thanks for joining us. Those are the 5 mistakes that we often see folks who are retiring, particularly in Iowa, but other states, make, and ways that you can sidestep those, or at least some ideas of things that we believe you can do to sidestep those things.
Yeah.
And we hope you enjoy that. You can also, you can seek out, we have a piece called 5 Costly Mistakes and ways to avoid that. If you want to get a hold of that, we can put those below in the show notes. You can download that as well.
All right.
All right. Till next time. See you then.
See you.